Welcome everyone to the 7th deep dive in our Arthashastra series.
Great to be back.
Today we're diving into a really interesting part of the text, looking at this, this whole cluster of different officials.
That's right. It's where we see the real machinery of the state laid out, isn't it?
Yeah.
Superintendents, controllers, covering just about everything.
Everything from like farming and forests,
To metals, trade, textiles.
and even gambling and drinking. It's quite the list.
It really is. It gives you a snapshot of what the state thought was important enough to manage directly.
Okay, so that's our mission today, folks. We're going to unpack all this information. We want to see, what exactly were these officials doing? What skills did they need?
And crucially, what does this tell us about how this ancient society was organized? What were their priorities?
Exactly. Get ready for some maybe surprising details.
Yes.
I mean, managing royal herds down to the last detail. Regulating betting. It's fascinating stuff. So let's start where the economy often starts. Agriculture, forestry, livestock. The text lays out some key figures here.
Indeed. First up is the chief superintendent of crown lands. Now, the key thing here is crown lands. Their job was only about the land the state owned directly.
Ah, okay, so the land they farmed themselves or leased out the settled land?
Precisely. That regular agricultural tax on private land, that was someone else's job, the Samahart, the chancellor.
Got it. So a clear separation. State land management was its own big deal.
A very big deal. And this superintendent managed the workforce for it. Slaves, laborers, even people working off fines.
And the text gets specific about pay, doesn't it? Like food based on family size plus, what was it, 1.25 panas a month?
That's the figure mentioned, yeah. A cash wage alongside the food. Artisans, though, were paid differently, sort of piece rate, based on the work done.
So just, a fairly structured system for state labor.
It does. And if the land was leased, there were different deals?
Right, like if you just provided the labor, you got less of the harvest, maybe a quarter or a fifth.
Exactly. But if you brought your own oxen, seeds, everything, you provided all the inputs, then you got half.
Makes sense. And they even had provisions for leasing out newly cleared land, right? With maybe easier terms, especially if times were tough.
Yeah, the payment could apparently be waived in times of distress. It's quite pragmatic, really, aiming to keep the land productive.
And it wasn't just the land itself. Water rates, too. The superintendent handled that.
Seems so. Water management was clearly vital, so the state controlled the fees for it.
And the harvest process itself. The detail is kind of amazing.
Isn't it? Collect everything, even the chaff. Pile the sheaves just so, not too tight, not too loose, with roofs made of the same straw.
Wow. And the threshing floor rules. Water for workers, but absolutely no fire nearby.
Total focus on efficiency and preventing loss. Every grain mattered.
You can really picture it. But there were some allowances, too, for ascetics, scholars.
Yes, they could take certain fallen grains or fruits, and gleaners could pick up what was left after the main harvest, so some consideration for others.
Okay, fascinating. Now let's shift gears slightly to the forests. The chief superintendent of productive forests. Sounds important.
Very. And look at the qualifications needed. Knowledge of trees, plants, their uses, byproducts.
Even animal products, including poisons and forest metals.
Right. This wasn't just about chopping down trees, it was about exploiting all the forest's resources for the state.
So what did they actually do?
Well, organize collection via forest rangers, obviously, but also set up factories.
Factories. In the forest.
Some inside, some outside. Processing forest materials into, well, everyday goods, but also stuff needed for defense.
So direct state involvement in forest industries.
Absolutely. And they set the fees for collecting produce and the fines if you took stuff without permission. Though, again, fines could be waived in hard times.
That pragmatic streak again. And creating enclosures for animals.
Yeah, deer, other animals, even wild ones, maybe early conservation, maybe just managing resources. Hard to say for sure.
Interesting. Okay, on to livestock, another huge area. The chief superintendent of crown herds. That sounds like a massive job.
Oh, definitely. Think about the logistics. Their main focus seems to have been meticulous accounts.
Keeping track of everything.
Everything. Total numbers, births, deaths, losses, how much milk and ghee was produced. They even had specific rules for identifying calves branding or ear nicking within a month or two.
Wow. And tracking stray cattle, too.
If they weren't claimed, yes, marked and brought into the state system. It suggests really tight control over these assets.
The level of detail needed for records. You mentioned branding, but also natural marks, color, horns.
Exactly. And if an animal died, you had to report why. And if it was natural causes, you needed proof. like the hide or horns maybe.
Incredible administrative effort.
It really is. And they thought about breeding too, though the text isn't super specific on ratios here. But it mentions different types of herds.
Like?
Well, herds looked after by state employees, cow herds, milkers, churners, even hunter guards, all paid in cash.
Cash only. Why is that specified?
The text suggests it was to prevent them starving the calves by taking too much milk for themselves.
Ah, clever.
Then you had contracted herds, herds of unproductive animals managed for an annual fee, and even private cattle under royal protection for a fee.
A multi-pronged approach to livestock management. Very sophisticated.
And nothing wasted. Buttermilk for dogs and pigs, cheese for the army, whey mixed with oilcade for feed.
Right, you mentioned that. Even the remains of animals that died naturally.
Hair, skin, sinews, bones all had to be delivered up. The herdsmen could sell the flesh, though. Resourceful.
Definitely resourceful. And the herdsmen themselves had strict duties.
Oh, yes. Graze in safe areas, choose the right pasture for the season, keep animals grouped by type with guards, use bells for nervous ones, find safe watering holes.
Crocodile-free watering holes, the text says.
Yes. Specific milking times, too. Twice a day in cooler weather, once when it was hot. And care for the young, old, and sick.
Sounds like good animal husbandry, really. But also tight control.
Absolutely. Strict punishments for negligence, theft, killing, even swapping a good state animal for a worse one. Livestock was clearly a major state asset.
And rules for private herds, too. Rewards for finding stolen cattle, taxes on sales.
Yes, it wasn't just about the state's own animals. Okay, now for a slightly odd one.
The chief protector of animals and controller of animal slaughter. Seems contradictory.
It does, doesn't it? But it reflects a kind of a selective approach. They protected certain species entirely.
Like unusual fish, specific birds, curlews, ospreys, swans, and anything considered auspicious.
Exactly. No trapping, killing, or injuring those, especially not in reserved parks. So clear conservation for some.
But then the controller of slaughter part kicks in for other animals.
Right. For animals that were normally eaten, there were still rules. You couldn't slaughter calves, bulls, or milch cows.
Protecting the breeding stock and milk supply. Makes sense.
And any live birds or deer received as tax, they were released into sanctuaries.
So it's a mix. Conservation for some, careful management, and maximizing utility for others. Balancing needs, maybe?
That's how it looks. It's a really complex picture of resource management. Okay, should we move on to industry?
Yes, let's.
Yeah.
This is another big area in this part of the text. Where do we start?
Right at the top with the chief controller of mining and metallurgy, a big title.
And needing big knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Ores, smelting, gems.
Exactly. This was a highly technical field, and this controller oversaw a whole team.
Like who?
The superintendents of mines, of metals, the master of the mint, the examiner of coins, even the salt commissioner reported up to this person.
Wow, central control over all mineral wealth, basically.
Pretty much. And a key part of their job was stopping illegal mining and theft, especially of valuable stuff like gems.
Makes sense. So under them, the superintendent of mines dealt with gems and pearls and things.
Yes, establishing factories for mother of pearl, diamonds, gems, pearls, coral, quartz, mica, and organizing the trade in them.
While the superintendent of metals handled the more common metals.
Copper, lead, tin, iron, kakrataka, whatever that was, possibly an alloy component. Setting up factories, making alloys like brass and bronze, and organizing that trade too.
A clear division. And then the money itself. The chief master of the mint.
Crucial role. Minting silver coins, copper coins in specific denominations, and importantly, with fixed alloy ratios.
Yeah, you mentioned those ratios earlier. Silver, copper, hardener.
Mm-hmm.
Very precise. That standardization must have been key for trade.
Absolutely vital. But how do you make sure the coins are good? That's the next official.
The examiner of coins.
Right.
Their job was quality control.
Essentially, yes. Certifying coins were legit before they could be used in trade or paid into the treasury. They charged fees for this.
And made sure new coins didn't circulate until fees and taxes were paid.
Correct. Plus, they had the power to fine people for funny business. Illegal minting, dodgy trading, passing bad coins, or even rejecting good ones.
Specific fines, too, like 12 panas for getting it wrong.
Yes, it shows how seriously they took monetary integrity. Accuracy and honesty were paramount.
A really tight system. Okay, what about the salt commissioner? Salt seems basic, but important.
Definitely important. The details are a bit thinner here, but they oversaw production and distribution. Interestingly, some people got it free.
Like forest dwellers, Brahmins, ascetics, laborers.
For personal use, yes. And there was a tax on imported salt, but only if it wasn't for consumption, apparently. State control over a fundamental need.
Okay, now for the shiny stuff. Chief Superintendent of Precious Metals and Jewelry.
Right. Another role needing serious expertise. Knowing gold, silver, gems, how to test them, the touchstone method is mentioned.
Different stones for buying versus selling. That's clever.
Isn't it? They also needed to know manufacturing, gem setting, estimating materials. Very skilled.
And they oversaw the goldsmiths in the market, but also a main crown workshop.
Yes, and the description of that workshop. Super secure, single entry, separate rooms, strip searches of workers, tools accounted for, work sealed up at night.
High security.
Yeah.
Shows how much they valued gold and silver and how worried they were about theft.
Totally. They were very aware of the potential for fraud. The superintendent had to ensure gold was tested properly, watch out for hidden copper in silver work or silver and gold settings.
Always checking for deception.
Constantly. And the controller of goldsmiths and silversmiths who reported to the superintendent had a similar focus, but on the private smiths.
Supervising them, preventing trade and stolen goods, inspecting work.
Inspecting weight, purity, everything. And watching the smiths themselves very closely because the text even lists ways they might try to hide stolen metal.
Wow. It really was a constant battle against pilfering.
Seems like it. Finally, in this industry section, we have the Chief Textile Commissioner.
Okay, so yarn, clothes, ropes, essential goods.
Yes. Manufacturing and trading these. They employed spinners, including women working from home or in special sheds.
Wages based on quality and quantity, with bonuses.
Right, and raw materials provided. Weavers, mentioned as men, had wages agreed up front with incentives for special fabrics.
But again, strict oversight. Watching the weavers for theft?
Always. And really specific rules about interacting with the women spinners, like only inspecting their work by lamplight, fines for looking too long or talking unnecessarily.
Interesting social rules built in there. And fines for late wages.
Yes, or paying for work not done. It suggests an attempt at fair, though heavily regulated, labor practices.
It's just, the breadth of state control is staggering. Agriculture, forests, mines, mints, workshops, textiles.
It's incredibly comprehensive, isn't it? A real window into a highly organized, state-managed economy focused on revenue, quality, and preventing fraud. We've barely scratched the surface of all the officials mentioned.
Absolutely. Okay, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll tackle the officials involved in trade, transport, and maybe even some of the more surprising areas like leisure control. Don't go anywhere. And we're back, continuing our deep dive into the officials of the Arthashastra state. We've covered agriculture, forestry, livestock, and industry. Now, let's look at trade and transport.
Right, another crucial area. And here we see a split similar to the land management. There's a chief controller of state trading.
State trading, so monopolies.
Essentially, yes,
Yep.
overseeing goods the state traded directly. But the principles mentioned are interesting. Aiming to benefit the public, maintaining buffer stocks, preventing huge price swings.
So not just pure profit, also managing the market.
It seems so. Aiming for reasonable profit margins, importing strategic goods, collecting taxes on transactions, even fixing future prices and setting wages for sales agents. It's quite interventionist.
Okay, so that's state trade. What about private merchants?
There's a separate official, the chief controller of private trading. Their job was more about ensuring fair play.
How so?
Checking weights and measures, enforcing profit margins like 5% on local goods, 10% on imports apparently, making sure prices were fixed and known.
Preventing monopolies or price gouging by private traders.
Exactly. Preventing collusion like traders buying up unsold stock together to control prices. Also dealing with stolen goods, you needed proof of ownership to sell secondhand items.
Sounds like consumer protection almost. Any exceptions?
Yes, for damaged goods, the rules might be relaxed. And they regulated brokers, too, making sure their fees weren't hidden in the profit margin, limiting how much stock they could hold.
Fascinating. And you mentioned weights and measures. Was there a specific official for that?
Oh, yes. The chief controller of weights and measures, a vital role for fair trade.
What did they do? Make the weights.
Their workshops did, yes. Using specific materials, iron or certain types of stone for weights, specific hardwoods for capacity measures, and designed precisely
Designed how?
to be accurate and tamper-proof. They shouldn't change weight with moisture or heat. Measures for dry goods were meant to be heaped liquids level with the brim, except wine, which could be measured heaped too, interestingly.
Huh. Special treatment for wine.
Mm-hmm.
And they sold these standard instruments.
At fixed prices, yes. And crucially, they inspected and stamped everyone else's weights and measures every 4 months, for a fee, of course.
And penalties if you used unstamped ones.
Absolutely. Ensuring standardization across the board.
Makes sense. Okay, moving goods around. Customs and city entry fees. Octroi.
That falls under the chief collector of customs in octroi, stationed at the city gates, usually facing east or north, marked by the king's flag.
What was their main goal? Just collecting fees?
Not just that. They were also meant to control imports, preventing harmful or useless goods, encouraging beneficial ones like rare seeds.
So a bit of trade policy involved too.
Seems like it. They'd appraise goods, check if any were exempt from duty, calculate what was owed, allow sale only after measurement and payment. They had staff, 4 or 5 collectors per post.
And kept records of merchants.
Yes, names, origins, goods, collected duties, octroi, which was typically a fifth of the customs duty, and any fines. Duty rates were often based on tradition.
And they coordinated with officials on the borders.
Yes, getting info about incoming caravans from frontier officers. It was an integrated system.
Okay, what about water transport? Rivers seem important.
Very. Enter the chief controller of shipping and ferries. They set the rules for harbor commissioners.
State-owned boats.
For large rivers, yes. State ferries with crews, smaller boats on seasonal rivers. They also used royal vessels for freight and passengers, charging fees.
Could private individuals hire them?
Fishermen could hire them for pearl or conch fishing, subject to mining rules. And if a state boat was lost due to the crew's negligence, compensation was due.
What about security? Pirates?
The controller was responsible for destroying pirate ships or any vessels heading to enemy territory or just breaking rules. They also had to rescue ships in distress.
And maybe give them a break on customs if their cargo was damaged.
Exactly, duty concessions. Ferries operated at fixed, secure crossing points. Ferrymen needed someone to vouch for them and had to deposit their earnings daily.
Did everyone pay?
No, certain people got free passage with a pass: Brahmins, ascetics, children, pregnant women, officials. Ferries might only run seasonally on smaller rivers.
And border ferries collected duties too.
Yes, and they were meant to arrest anyone suspicious trying to cross without papers. Though essential workers like fishermen or farmers might be exempt from penalties for crossing at unauthorized points if necessary.
A whole system just for river crossings. Was there a separate port controller?
Mentioned briefly as making regulations for shipping, likely overseeing harbor masters under the main shipping controller.
Okay. And one more slightly mysterious role. Chief surveyor and timekeeper.
Yes, responsible for measuring space and time. But the text here doesn't give much detail on exactly how or what qualifications were needed. An intriguing but less defined role in this section.
Right, so that covers trade and transport. Now for the section that might surprise some listeners, controlling leisure activities.
Yes, the state definitely had an interest here. First, the chief controller of alcoholic beverages.
Controlling booze, how?
By arranging state manufacture using experts in brewing and fermenting, but also controlling private production and supervising sales.
So state-run bars.
Sort of. Drinking places had to have rooms, beds, seats, a pleasant environment. Liquor sellers, or vintners, sold only for cash at fixed prices. Spoilt liquor had to be disposed of separately.
And strict accounting?
Daily revenue reports. And tight control over where people drank. Generally, only in licensed houses. You couldn't wander around drunk or take large amounts out of villages.
Exceptions?
Maybe small amounts for people known to be reliable, but the main idea was containment.
And maintaining order in these places.
Absolutely. Arresting people carrying suspicious items, using spies or servants to gather intel on the patrons. It was about revenue, but also social control.
Wow. Okay, what other entertainment was controlled?
A lot. There was a chief controller of entertainers covering courtesans, brothels, prostitutes, but also actors, dancers, musicians, storytellers, a wide range.
What did this controller do?
Supervised all these professions. They even arranged state-funded training for courtesans, prostitutes, and actresses in things like singing, music, dance.
State-funded training. Really?
Apparently so. They also supervised licensed brothels, handled inheritance issues for head courtesans, and appointed courtesans to attend the king, graded by beauty and salary.
A whole hierarchy. What about managing their careers?
Yes, rules for their release or retirement, and enforcing their obligations, like prostitutes couldn't sell or mortgage their jewelry, couldn't refuse a client after being paid, and had to obey the king's orders.
But were they protected at all?
Yes, the text includes rules against forcing their daughters into the profession, abduction, injury, or clients cheating them.
Wow.
So, regulation and some protection.
And revenue, presumably?
Oh, yes. Brothels had to report income and expenses. Independent prostitutes paid tax on earnings. Even foreign entertainers paid a license fee. Punishments got harsher for repeat offenses.
It's a very managed and taxed sector. What about gambling?
Also controlled. The chief controller of gambling and betting. The same rules generally applied to both.
Rules like?
Gambling only allowed in designated places run by licensed honest masters, so they could spot cheating.
Ah, makes sense.
The gambling master provided the dice, boards, etc., charged fees, and could accept items as pledges for bets. The state took a cut 5% tax on winnings.
What about disputes?
The controller handled them. Kautilya's view, interestingly, was just to find both the winner and the loser in a dispute, perhaps to discourage arguments.
Discourage arguments or just collect more fines?
Could be both.
Mm-hmm.
So even leisure wasn't outside the state's watchful eye?
Clearly not. Okay, moving on quickly, movement control. Passports.
Yes, two key roles here. First, the chief controller of pasture lands.
Pastures, why control movement there?
Their job was broader. Yes, clear land for grazing between villages, dig wells, plant orchards, but also security.
Security how?
Clearing out thieves and dangerous animals using hunters with hounds, setting up alarm systems like watchtowers with pigeons or smoke signals.
So intelligence gathering.
Definitely. Reporting any enemy or tribal movements to the king. Also protecting forests and roads, ensuring caravans and trade were safe. They were even liable if robbery or murder happened in their area.
Wow, high stakes. And checking people's movements.
Yes, asking for passes. Which brings us to the chief passport officer.
So they actually had passports.
Passes, anyway. Issued with an official seal for travel within the country. Various officials, including the pasture controller, would check them. Movement was regulated.
Incredible. Just a couple more categories mentioned. Miscellaneous officials.
A few interesting ones. The chief superintendent of temples and holy places.
What was their main role? Looking after temples.
Primarily, it seems, as a potential source of revenue in emergencies. The text mentions collecting temple wealth under false pretenses if the state was desperate. Their normal contribution isn't clear.
A bit cynical. What about jails?
The chief superintendent of jails. Looked after lockups and prisons, mostly for debtors or those awaiting trial, it seems. Had authority over prisoner transfers, status, even punishment like deprivation or torture.
Grim. And a protector of deposits.
Managed unclaimed pledges and deposits. Not really a department head, more a specific function.
Okay, and briefly, beneath all these chiefs, there were subordinates.
Of course. Warehouse workers, retail managers under the state trading controller, and critically, the village headmen, the Gramika.
What do the village headmen do?
Lots of local stuff. Marked village boundaries, managed grazing land, collected local revenue like grazing fees and fines, settled minor disputes, organized community work and festivals, and ensured village safety. A key figure at the local level.
And the villagers themselves had duties.
Yes, contribute to community projects, obey sensible proposals, and collective responsibility for defense.
Right, which leads nicely into the final section mentioned here. Broader civic responsibilities and municipal rules. Not tied to one official, but applying to everyone.
Exactly. Things like general negligence, don't leave dangerous structures standing, keep weapons sheathed. Give warnings if you're doing something potentially hazardous, like felling a tree or leading an animal.
Common sense safety rules. What about traffic?
Yes, a traffic code. Carts should only be driven by adults, or minors if accompanied. Reckless driving causing injury meant liability unless it was truly unavoidable.
Sounds familiar. Privacy.
Neighbors. Don't interfere without cause, but do help neighbors in distress. A duty of mutual aid.
Nice. And common facilities.
Contribute to building them. Don't obstruct or damage them. Protect public trees and plants. Generally, be a good neighbor. Don't cause harm to the immediate area.
And specific rules for townsmen.
Yes, especially fire prevention. Precautions in summer, mandatory firefighting equipment like buckets and ladders. Hygiene was key, no dumping waste in public places.
And building regulations.
Oh, yes. Rules about boundaries, rainwater drainage, keeping safe distances between houses, window placement to avoid overlooking neighbors, not blocking pathways or drains. Very detailed urban planning.
It's just the sheer level of detail across every aspect of life is what's so striking, isn't it?
It truly is.
Yeah.
From the highest levels of state finance and resource management, right down to neighborhood rules and fire buckets.
Well, that was an absolutely packed deep dive into this section of the Arthashastra. We've seen this incredibly detailed, almost bureaucratic structure for governing pretty much everything.
Yeah, agriculture, industry, trade, security, even leisure and neighborhood conduct. The state's reach was extensive.
The focus on revenue is undeniable. You see it everywhere. But there's also this clear emphasis on order, on predictability, on safety.
And maybe even elements of public welfare, like the fair trade principles, the buffer stocks, the civic duties. it's complex.
What really stands out to you from all that? Anything particularly surprising?
For me, it's often the tiny details, the specific alloy ratios for coins, the rules for piling sheaves, the security checks for goldsmiths. It suggests a society that really valued precision and control, and perhaps had learned hard lessons about fraud and mismanagement.
Yeah, that precision is startling. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How did this compare to other ancient states? And what echoes of this kind of detailed regulation do we still see today, maybe in different forms?
Absolutely. It sparks so many questions about how societies choose to organize themselves, what they prioritize, and how they try to manage complexity.
It really does.
Think about a village where everything just clicks, you know? A city so well-oiled it hums without you even noticing. What would it take, really, to build that kind of seamless system? Surprisingly, the blueprint might be thousands of years old.
That's exactly right.
The village.
Yes, the sources really hammer this home. The village, or grama, was the fundamental building block of the entire state. It wasn't just, a collection of houses. It was seen as the primary political unit. And right at its center was the grammaca.
Right, the village headman. But more than just the person who calls the town meetings, yeah. The texts describe the grammaca as a real multitasker, handling everything from, like, judging disputes to keeping records, almost like a local mayor.
Exactly. A judge, clerk, mayor kind of rolled into one. His responsibilities were incredibly wide-ranging. His focus was squarely on the vital aspects of village life. How productive the land was, changes in population, resolving disagreements naturally, and even monitoring temple attendance, which is interesting. It shows how interconnected life was. Even religious observance was part of the local leader's concern.
That tells you something about their view of community well-being.
It does. And he wasn't doing it all alone either. The Granca had support. You had the village elders, the Panchas, who were absolutely key in settling conflicts and upholding local customs, the customary law.
Okay.
And we also see mentions of scribes, which highlights, the early importance of keeping track of things, even right there at the village level.
So records were important from the get-go.
Very. And what's really interesting, I think, is the balance of power here. The Grammaca and the elders has significant local control. That allowed for, quick, trusted decisions based on their specific knowledge of the community.
Makes sense. Context matters.
Right. Yet the authority of the king was always there, described almost as a constant presence, ensuring overall cohesion, accountability. It's an early model, really, of balancing local autonomy with central oversight, a valuable lesson for governance anywhere, anytime.
So you get that local flexibility for speed and trust, but also that overarching framework for stability. Okay, the village is the bedrock. But the sources also shine a light on these unseen architects of order, as they put it, these officials working more behind the scenes. Where should we dive in next there?
Well, let's look at the superintendent of commerce, the Panyajaksha. This official played a really crucial role in ensuring fairness and integrity in the marketplace.
The details about this role are fantastic. I was picturing, fingers stained with turmeric and ink from stamping goods. It gives you such a clear picture of their day-to-day work, ensuring quality, fighting fraud, not with force, but with, careful records and just being watchful.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is the level of detail they monitored. Daily price fluctuations. Apparently they could spot hoarders just by observing their carts or something. It reflects a pretty sophisticated understanding of economics, actually, and the importance of fair trade.
Yeah, you can really see the historical roots of, say, modern consumer protection agencies in a role like that.
Definitely. It highlights this timeless need for systems that protect consumers, ensure a level playing field in the market.
Absolutely. Okay, and then we have the Karanika, the record keeper. The sources describe them as being quiet, but, all-knowing. Every name, every piece of land, every birth, every crime. That story about catching a thief because a missing cow was noted in the birth registry. I mean, that's just incredible.
It truly is.
Yeah.
And it emphasizes the sheer power of meticulous record keeping. Governance here wasn't about grand gestures, was it? It was about the quiet, persistent power of information. Knowing the details, having accurate records, these were absolutely fundamental to maintaining order and ensuring justice.
It underscores that reliable data, even low-tech data, is just a cornerstone of good governance.
Precisely, even without fancy tech.
Okay, next up, the superintendent of forests, the Vanayaksha. Now, this description really surprised me. Instead of some, rugged axe-wielding figure, we get this picture of a quiet priest-like figure who knows plant names and wind directions.
Yes, it reveals a very different understanding of the relationship between the state and, nature. The Vanajaksha's job went way beyond just, exploiting resources. It involved tracking wildlife, managing controlled hunting, overseeing the collection of vital resources, herbs, honey, wood, and importantly, preventing illegal deforestation. There's that quote, "To rule a forest is to understand it listens." That really captures this idea, doesn't it? The forest is a living partner, a vital resource that needed understanding and respect. It really echoes the principles of modern environmental agencies in a way.
It really does. That ancient role highlights something we're still grappling with today. Sustainable management requires deep understanding, respect, not just taking.
Exactly. It's a far cry from just seeing the forest as something to be conquered. It implies a balanced relationship.
Okay, then there's the Kautilya, the prison superintendent. The sources seem to challenge our perhaps grim view of ancient prisons. They focus on paperwork and the intention, at least in theory, of reform.
Yes. What's quite remarkable are the codes they apparently followed. Things like time-limited sentences, separating different kinds of prisoners, keeping health records, even allowing petitions for reduced sentences if someone showed remorse.
Wow.
And that, quote, "punishment without precision is tyranny." That's quite powerful, isn't it? It suggests a really nuanced understanding of justice, or at least the ideal.
It does.
And the anecdote, the one about the thief being moved by his daughter's gift, that really illustrates this idea of maybe restorative power, guiding people back to order, not just punishing them.
It's a surprisingly, maybe progressive isn't the right word, but thoughtful view on corrections for the time.
It seems so. We also hear about the superintendent of public works. The sources say they helped the city breathe.
That's a powerful metaphor.
It is. What did that involve?
Well, their responsibilities include maintaining essential infrastructure, things like inspecting wells, making sure they were safe, repairing roads, interestingly, through the organized participation of villagers, like rotating duties.
Community involvement.
Yes. And even the seemingly small act of whitewashing public buildings before festivals for morale and cleanliness. And the state oversight of temples, the texts suggest it wasn't about controlling religious belief, more about ensuring social harmony and maybe resource management.
Right.
The whole system seems built on a sense of community rhythm, shared responsibility, rather than just rigid top-down control. And we can't forget the Lekaka, the registrar, this ancient figure who'd apparently seen 5 kings, their memory basically etched in scrolls. The sheer variety of records they managed, land grants, disputes, even dowry records, it's astonishing.
It is, and that quote attributed to them, "The ruler may forget, but the record does not." That's so insightful. It highlights the Arthashastra not just as a rule book, but as a living history, a system of memory holding the state accountable.
Yeah, it really emphasizes the enduring importance of accurate, accessible civic archives, a living memory.
Precisely.
Now, the sources also mention the chief superintendent of temples, and his role is described as paradoxical, especially when it comes to accessing temple wealth during financial difficulties through these fabricated causes of loss. That sounds a bit, well,
Ethically ambiguous, yes, perhaps to our modern ears. It certainly illustrates the complex relationship between sacred institutions and secular power. It really speaks to the practical, maybe pragmatic considerations of governance, where even deeply respected entities might be called upon, maybe discreetly, to support the state in critical times.
a necessary compromise, perhaps, in their view?
Possibly. And finally, there's the protector of deposits, the Adipala, this sort of shadowy figure managing unclaimed wealth.
Right. In a time before digital records, they were like this living ledger of community trust, handling forgotten fortunes.
Exactly. It underscores the state's role in providing a kind of safety net, maintaining order, even when ownership was unclear. It's a testament to a commitment to prevent economic instability in a way.
So we see all these officials, these unseen architects playing these vital roles, but the sources also make it clear that civic life wasn't just about them, right? It was deeply connected to the responsibilities of the citizens themselves.
Absolutely. In the villages, for instance, there was a clear expectation of villager responsibility, contributing to festivals, participating in communal tasks like that road repair we mentioned, and following the guidance of leaders focused on their well-being. And there were consequences, apparently, for not fulfilling these shared obligations, reinforcing the idea that the village's success, its survival even, depended on everyone's contribution.
A real sense of collective duty. And the village elders, the panchas, you mentioned them earlier, they played this incredible role as the judiciary and conscience of rural life, didn't they? Overseeing inheritance, disputes, temple lands.
Yes, the power of oral tradition and precedent in their hands seems quite remarkable. There's that quote, "They didn't just know the law, they were the law." That truly captures their authority and the deeply ingrained nature of customary practices. It highlights a system built really on trust and the community's accumulated wisdom.
Okay, so moving from the village to urban life, we see a similar emphasis on civic responsibility, don't we?
We do. Things like public safety rules around construction, even managing animals. These early urban traffic laws for carts, making sure things get moving safely. Fire prevention measures, mandatory tools, bans on cooking at certain times perhaps, sanitation guidelines, how to dispose of waste properly, and even building regulations that respected neighbors' space and access to light and air. It paints a picture of a community acutely aware of its interconnectedness.
Shared space means shared caution.
Exactly. Shared space necessitates shared responsibility. These regulations weren't just arbitrary, they were designed for the safety and harmony of everyone. It's a reminder that even way back then, there was an understanding that your actions could have big consequences for others nearby.
Right, and even public festivals, you mentioned them being celebratory, but they also served as tools for building unity, morale.
Yes. And it's interesting, again, how even temple resources could be, well, discreetly used in times of hardship. It illustrates that intersection, again, the sacred and the practical, all for the perceived greater good of the community's stability.
A very pragmatic approach to keeping society cohesive, addressing crises using all available resources.
It seems that way.
So, reflecting on all of this, that listener's question from the source really hits home. What have we preserved? In today's digital world, we have just vast amounts of data, but do we truly listen to our communities in the same way? We have incredibly extensive legal frameworks, sure, but do we have that same level of maybe meticulous record-keeping integrity? We have detailed city plans, but do we really know the needs and concerns of our people on the ground, like perhaps the Gromyka did?
That's the core question, isn't it? Kautilya's aim, as the sources suggest, was conscious administration, not just blind adherence to rules. It seems to have been a system built on checks and balances, a certain natural rhythm of life, ecological awareness built in, and accountability at, well, all levels.
And that guiding question posed for a modern public servant is so thought-provoking. Am I truly serving the public, or am I just occupying a position, or wearing its colors, as the source put it?
Right. It makes you consider the underlying motivation, the commitment.
Yeah.
And when we look at the Arthashastra's principles and the challenges we face today, we see some really striking parallels and maybe potential areas for learning. Think about decentralized authority versus, bureaucratic bottlenecks we often see now.
Right.
Or the ideal of record keeping as a foundation for justice versus the very real risks of data mismanagement or breaches today. The concept of ecology-integrated governance versus the urgent reality of climate change. The connections are, well, undeniable.
And the potential lessons we could maybe draw from this ancient system, things like empowering local communities more effectively.
Yes, or investing seriously in robust, secure, civic data systems.
Rebuilding sustainable resource management, maybe with more local leadership and knowledge, like the Vanataksha.
Using community events not just for fun, but strategically to rebuild trust and social bonds.
Ensuring real accountability in how data is collected and used, especially with surveillance concerns.
And fostering a genuine culture of servant leadership, moving away from corruption or just self-interest. All of these feel incredibly relevant, don't they?
They really do.
Ultimately, the Arthashastra's core focus, as these sources constantly remind us, wasn't really on the palace, on the power of the ruling elite. It was on the well-being of the people. And that underlying spirit of maybe discipline, humanity, and responsibility, that's a message that just transcends time.
Okay, so to maybe recap some key takeaways from this deep dive, this ancient system of governance had a really surprising level of sophistication, didn't it? With deeply embedded ethical considerations, at least in theory, and a strong focus on community well-being.
Definitely. And the roles of those often overlooked officials were absolutely crucial. They weren't just cogs in a machine.
No, and there was that significant emphasis on the responsibilities of every citizen, that sense of interconnectedness.
And understanding these foundational principles, I think, offers a really valuable perspective for analyzing how we govern ourselves today. We see these clear connections, these moments where ancient wisdom still provides insights into the challenges we're facing right now.
Yeah. So we'd encourage you, our listener, to maybe think about how these principles, distributing authority, careful record keeping, respecting the environment, fostering community involvement, how might they apply in your own work or your own community? It really makes you wonder, In our world, which feels increasingly complex, have we somehow unintentionally overcomplicated some of the fundamental principles of effective governance that were articulated so clearly centuries ago?
It's a great question. Maybe worth exploring the Arthashastra and related texts further if this sparked your interest.
Absolutely.
And maybe it leaves us with a final thought to mull over. If the strength of a society, an empire, whatever you call it, truly lies in its foundational levels, the villages, the neighborhoods, and the dedicated work of its often unseen officials and engaged citizens, well, what are the foundations, the villages, and the unsung heroes of our own modern societies, our organizations, our communities today? And crucially, are we giving them the attention, the support, the resources they truly deserve?
When we think about empires, rising and falling, we often picture the big battles, the famous rulers.
The headline events.
Exactly. But what if the real key, the secret sauce, lies somewhere else?
Well, Kautilya's insight is that these areas are often the shakiest. You've got different cultures bumping up against each other, maybe economic neglect.
Right, fertile ground for trouble.
Exactly. Makes them vulnerable to outsiders stirring things up or just, internal resentment boiling over. He's saying real, lasting power comes from having those edges properly integrated, not just a strong center controlling everything from afar.
So managing these distant areas, that sounds like a challenge. How did Kautilya suggest doing it effectively?
He lays out this really quite sophisticated, multi-layered strategy. One key part was appointing viceroys. And crucially, he suggests picking people from the royal family, or nobles you really trust.
So a direct line, a personal connection back to the throne.
Precisely. A visible symbol of the empire's authority. But, like you said, that wasn't enough on its own.
Right. You need eyes and ears, too, I imagine.
Absolutely. Alongside that visible power, Kautilya hammers home the need for a really good intelligence network. Spies, informers, embedded with the local chiefs and leaders.
So constantly feeling the pulse, checking loyalty.
Yes. Getting information flowing back constantly, spotting potential trouble early. It's very much about preemption.
Makes sense. But it wasn't all just stick, was it? Any carrot involved.
Definitely. Kautilya knew you couldn't just watch and punish. He advocated actually giving these border communities specific perks, protections, reasons to want to be loyal.
Okay. So involve them, give them a stake in the system.
Exactly that. Involvement builds loyalty, he argues. Neglect just opens the door to rebellion. It's a mix of oversight and incentives.
Okay, that's the periphery covered. Now, moving inwards, Kautilya zooms in on the villages, and he sees them as way more than just places where people farm, right?
Oh, absolutely. His view of the Grammika, the village headman, is fascinating. This wasn't just some local bigwig. They were a crucial node in the whole administrative network.
Broadening upwards.
Directly to regional superintendents, yeah. The Arthashastra basically says the smallest unit, the village, is where imperial intelligence starts.
Yeah.
Good governance needs that granular detail.
And what were they responsible for? More than just collecting taxes, I assume.
Much more. The Grammika had to track all sorts of population data. Births, deaths, people moving in or out, even like who built a new shed.
Wow, detailed.
And they coordinated local labor for projects, settled minor arguments, reported crime. Think local admin, tax guy, and maybe even a bit of law enforcement rolled into one.
So they were the linchpin for gathering all that ground-level information.
Totally. And maybe the most critical part, they were the empire's early warning system. They had to report disasters, floods, famines, any signs of unrest bubbling up.
Right. So Kautilya saw governance as being fundamentally about information flow, starting right at the bottom.
You got it. It paints a picture of an empire that's trying to be incredibly self-aware.
Now, to manage all this, all these villages and regions and the information flowing back and forth, Kautilya had a specific structure in mind. He called it a chain without weak links. What did that look like?
Yeah, it's quite hierarchical. At the top, you've got the amatis, the ministers. They're setting policy, overseeing the big picture.
Okay, the cabinet, sort of.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Then below them, the stanika, the district officers. They're managing revenue, law and order in a whole district.
Right.
Then you drill down to the gopa, the sub-district guys. They're tracking movement, people, goods, keeping detailed records.
Getting more granular.
Exactly. And right at the base, there's our friend the Grammika, running the day-to-day in the village. And the key is understanding how information moved between these levels. Reports going up, orders coming down.
A two-way street. Vital for oversight, but also for adapting, I guess.
Absolutely. That flow was meant to keep the whole thing running smoothly and allow adjustments.
And if a link was weak, if someone wasn't doing their job, or worse.
Kautilya was pretty clear. No tolerance for slackers or corruption. Consequences could range from just getting sacked to much harsher punishments if there was actual wrongdoing, like embezzlement. Accountability was baked right into the design.
Which brings us neatly to, well, how do you keep such a big system honest? Kautilya clearly knew corruption was a danger.
Oh, definitely. He wasn't naive. He didn't just cross his fingers and hope everyone behaved. He designed systems specifically to counter corruption.
Integrity by design, you could say.
That's a great way to put it. Acknowledging that, people are fallible and you need structures to manage that.
So what did he actually do? What were these anti-corruption measures?
Several really clever things. Regular, tough audits of the books were standard. That's basic.
Sure.
But then he had these shadow officers, basically spies acting like regular clerks or workers, just watching the officials.
Undercover bosses, ancient style.
Kinda, yeah. Getting an unbiased inside view.
Right.
He also encouraged the public to report problems anonymously.
Really? Citizen oversight.
Yeah, and even offered rewards for whistleblowers. So multiple layers of checks. It's quite proactive, much more than just reacting when something goes wrong. Kautilya's point seems to be that if you want power to last, you have to actively fight corruption.
It's amazing how much that sounds like modern best practices. Okay, so you need clean admin, but an empire also runs on stuff. Resources. How did Kautilya connect governance to managing the economy and the land?
He saw them as completely intertwined. You can't separate governing from controlling and managing resources, land, trade, forests, mines, water, even labor. It's all part of the same statecraft package.
And he had specific people in charge of different bits.
Yep, specialized officers, like the Pandyjasha Superintendent of Commerce. Their job was to make sure trade was fair, prevent cheating, control prices sometimes.
Okay.
And the Vanadyaksha looked after forests and mines, thinking about, believe it or not, sustainable use.
Really? Sustainability?
Seems like it, yeah. Others managed farming, irrigation projects, land grants, and the Navatiaksha controlled ports, shipping, trade routes by sea, and security there.
It's just so comprehensive. Like, he saw the state woven into the economy and the environment itself.
Exactly. It wasn't an add-on. It was fundamental.
Now, amidst all this very practical, almost hard-nosed stuff, Kautilya throws in something a bit unexpected. This idea about the morality of power, that the king's happiness depends on his subjects being happy.
Yeah, it does seem a bit surprising at first glance, doesn't it? But the Arthashastra actually lays out how this should work in practice. It wasn't just a nice thought.
How so?
Well, things like fair taxation, making sure people weren't crushed by the burden, that was key. Making sure justice was available, even at the local level, so people felt wrongs could be righted.
Okay, practical benefits for the people.
Right, and providing relief in crises, famine, floods, invasions.
Yeah.
That was seen as a core duty of the ruler. Plus, respecting local customs and beliefs, even in places they'd just conquered.
So, building legitimacy, not just ruling by force.
Precisely. It frames it almost like a contract, a reciprocal thing. The ruler looks after the people, and the people remain loyal and productive. It was seen as essential for stability in the long run.
That adds a whole other layer. It feels much more sophisticated than the usual might makes right picture of ancient empires. And it sounds like this whole system wasn't meant to be rigid either. It could adapt.
You're absolutely right. Book VII really emphasizes that governance has to be dynamic, flexible. Kautilya wasn't building something set in stone.
How did he build in that flexibility?
Well, one big thing was regularly rotating officials, moving them around.
To stop them getting too powerful in one place, building their own little fiefdoms.
Exactly that. Pretty smart. He also explicitly says rulers should evaluate systems, and if they're not working, replace them. Don't just stick with tradition for tradition's sake.
Okay.
And interestingly, he encouraged ideas coming up from the lower ranks. Innovation wasn't just top-down, and policies should change based on feedback on what's actually happening, not just rigid rules.
It's almost like he saw the empire as a kind of living organism needing to adjust and evolve.
That's a great analogy. It needed to learn and adapt to survive and thrive.
Now, if we circle back to those crucial border areas for a moment, the text gives even more detail on handling those sensitive zones, right?
It does. Beyond just sending viceroys and spies, Kautilya talks about maybe granting some limited autonomy to local chiefs.
Oh, if they were loyal?
Yeah, if they played ball, paid their tribute. It was a way of acknowledging the existing power structures, trying to co-opt them, rather than just smash everything.
A bit more subtle than just imposing rule.
Definitely. He also talks about setting up military outposts, but And this is key, integrating them with civilian admin. It wasn't just about soldiers. It was about building a functioning government presence.
Right.
And diplomacy, economic investment, using those tools alongside the military and intelligence. Kautilya is very clear.
Yeah.
Force by itself won't cut it long term. You need patience. You need to actually integrate these places.
And presumably that massive spy network we talked about was working overtime in these borderlands.
Oh, absolutely crucial there. It wasn't just about spotting enemy spies. It was about knowing who among the local leaders was reliable, who was wavering, what the ordinary people were thinking, constant intel flow from the edges.
An early warning system, basically.
Exactly. And that whole surveillance mindset, as we mentioned, wasn't just for the borders. It permeated the entire system, checking up on officials everywhere. It was feedback for the empire itself, a check on power.
It really all ties together, doesn't it? Managing the borders needs good local admin, which needs good information, which needs accountability.
Which is reinforced by that rotation of officials we talked about, stopping anyone getting too comfortable or corrupt.
Right. And the reward system, too.
Yes. Rewarding results, more revenue, less crime, good ideas. Kautilya even mentions ways for local officers to suggest improvements, especially about the economy. Again, valuing that input from the ground up.
So when you boil it all down, synthesize everything we've discussed from Book VII, what's the ultimate takeaway message about how empires really last, according to Kautilya?
I think the core insight really is that lasting power isn't just about having the biggest army or the most charismatic leader. It's about the nuts and bolts, the strength, the resilience, the cleverness of the internal systems of governance. That's the real foundation.
The administrative machinery.
Exactly. As the text suggests, maybe the ruler's most powerful weapon isn't the sword, but the scroll, the administrative order, the system itself.
Okay, so summing up our deep dive, we've seen Kautilya focus on linking the center and the edges, the political weight of the humble village, and this layered administration built for accountability.
Yeah, and his really proactive ways to fight corruption, that tight link between governing and managing resources, and that surprising moral angle of the ruler's well-being tied to the people's.
Plus, the built-in flexibility, the constant learning, the vital role of information flowing everywhere. It's genuinely remarkable how relevant so many of these ancient ideas still feel. Makes you wonder, listening to this, what echoes do you see in the complex systems around us today?
It really does. This whole exploration underlines how power that endures needs more than just projection. It needs those intricate, often hidden systems, admin, economy, ethics, intelligence, all working together. And it leaves me with a kind of interesting question.
Go on.
Given how central information flow was to Kautilya's whole model, how might an ancient empire like his have even begun to cope with the challenges we face now? Things like, mass misinformation, the sheer speed of modern communication, if they'd had our tech.
That's a fascinating thought to chew on. Well, this dive has really only skimmed the surface of what's in texts like the Arthashastra, but hopefully it's given everyone a fresh look at the timeless principles behind running things effectively, way back then, and maybe even now. There's always more to uncover.
Indeed. Join us next time as we continue to unpack the intricacies and, frankly, the often surprising wisdom of this ancient text. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.